Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight for the Future of Denver series with the University of Denver. My name is Gertie Harris, and I'm the founder of Fireside at 5. We're a community-based programming and activation collective that works with local organizations and companies to educate, inspire, and mobilize through in-person and virtual events. Tonight, we have our 6th Fireside Chat of the series, which will explore how communities can take action to address insecurities in their backyard, specifically within the context of civic engagement, governance, policy, and grassroots organizing. This Fireside Chat is our final discussion of 2020 and of our 6-part live stream series with the University of Denver. Our chats are meant to be collaborative, solution-driven, and engaging, so we would love for anyone watching at home to get involved in the discussion by commenting or asking questions through the chat feature on Facebook or YouTube. We will try our best to get to all of them. Lastly, we'd like to give a special thanks to all of our panelists who are joining us today and the University of Denver for diving into these topics with us and furthering these important conversations. I'd like to thank Do 303, our media partner, who is helping us amplify this message, and Mythology Distillery, our third beverage partner, who has been so supportive and is offering 10% off all of our cocktail kits. Just be sure to use the promo Denver Future when ordering online. Thank you all again for tuning in tonight, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce our facilitator for the evening, Brian Elizardi, the Director of Alumni Engagement for the University of Denver.
Thank you, Gertie, and welcome everyone. My name is Brian Elizardi, and I'm super excited to be here with you tonight as we close out our 6-part Future of Denver series and our amazing, inspiring partnership with the team at Fireside at 5. I'm very pleased to be joining you from the University of Denver, where we have a proud tradition of producing graduates who are committed to shaping the public good here in Denver and around the world. And our goal really is to power the people and the projects that are helping to make Denver a more inclusive, a more authentic, and really just a more vibrant city. So it's hard to believe that tonight marks the final installment in our 6-part series. 10 weeks ago, we began this journey with this central thesis in mind. And that's this notion that if we embrace our new economy while focusing at the same time on inclusion and respect, if we balance our growth while simultaneously also encouraging things like affordability and access for the people who have called Denver home for generations, and if we stimulate small business success and bring more people, particularly women and entrepreneurs of color, into our award-winning ecosystem, we can truly build a world-class city that ensures greater economic success and opportunity for all. And along the way, we've hosted over 30 leaders from the community, including local government officials, business owners, social entrepreneurs, restaurateurs, and leading academics, to explore some of the key drivers for success and the ways that we as a great private university dedicated to the public good can identify and reinforce the key people and projects that will lead us forward, which is especially important during this pandemic. So tonight we want to put all this together. We want to wrap a bow on this amazing journey that we've been on and focus our attention on the most important element, which is how do we take all this learning and put it into action? And what are ways that we can mobilize a whole new generation of Denverites to really own and shape the success of all these dimensions through action and through engagement? And to do that, of course, we've assembled another amazing, inspiring panel of daring leaders who are building these social infrastructures where change and growth and equity can all flourish across our city. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and bring in these amazing leaders and let them introduce themselves. And we've asked them all to think about our prompt for tonight, which is this idea of what does empowerment look like in Denver? And so to jump us off, I'm really excited to introduce you to Chanilla Tyler, who's a co-executive director for the Kaleidoscope Project. Chanilla, welcome.
Chanella, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I'm obviously still adjusting to 2020 in December, right? All right. Well, I'm very grateful to be a part of this discussion. And Brian, thank you for your kind words. And Gertie, thank you for thinking of me for this conversation. I guess I should start off with just some things about myself, correct? am a Morehouse College graduate. I'm an artist, a grassroots community organizer. I'm a creator and a lover and many other things. And most of the time I'm just, just going with the wind and being whatever, whatever feels right for the day. But that's okay. And so this question of empowerment, I thought was a very interesting question to begin with, and for us to kind of start this conversation. And I'm glad that we started with this word empowerment, because I think it gives us a clear foundation for how we want to move forward. And so I had to kind of think about it, and I looked through some of the notes that were sent out and wanted to really understand this word. And this is something that's come up in the nonprofit world quite a bit for me, and like in my organizing experience, the idea of empowering communities. And I think about the pedagogy of the oppressed and Paulo Freire, and how he expresses this idea of the code of silence, and how we contribute to the code of silence when we submerge communities in these practices that don't allow them to learn and don't allow communities to become self-sustaining or self-sufficient. And even in our good intentions, we contribute to injustices in many ways by feeding into words like empowerment, because it deals with the hierarchy. It deals with being in a position of authority or being in a position where you could offer power. And when I think about BIPOC communities, marginalized communities, or communities that are disenfranchised, I think about the most innovative, powerful people that there are, understanding that there are different types of power. But when you really think about it, and I'm reminded of people like Chaz, who owns a TSG security company, who gives back to the community by offering self-defense classes for BIPOC individuals who might not be able to afford it. I think about Sister Ote, who organized a coalition of individuals who give back by fighting for food sovereignty and doing maintenance in marginalized communities so that people have access to food. I think about individuals like the natural leaders at the Village Exchange Center in Aurora, Colorado, who organize for all types of different aspects of community to get resources connected to refugees and immigrants within the community. And so the Kaleidoscope Project, organization that I'm blessed and honored to serve, what we are intentional about looking at is ways to activate power instead of framing it as empowering, because the power is already there. It already exists. The community members are innovative, they're strong, they're powerful, the most brilliant people that exist and survive under the most difficult of circumstances and still make beautiful things every day and find reasons to go forward. And so for us, it's about activating power through, particular ways that are intentional and ways that give back to the community and don't feed into the ego of saying that, oh, this work feels so good and we're doing great things, but really gives to the aspect of offering somebody humanity and integrity, and knowing that one day we're doing this work so that we don't have to do it anymore, and that those communities can be self-sustaining.
Love that. And thank you so much for helping to really frame, I think, the dialogue that's to happen around, that notion of what does empowerment mean, and, what's that history. And I think that'll really sort of put us on a nice, platform to really have a very powerful conversation tonight. So thank you, Janella, and thank you for being here. Jamie Duffy, Executive Director with Youth on Record. Delighted to have you on the call tonight. Tell us more about your background and what does this idea of empowerment mean to you in this day and age?
Yeah, thanks so much. And Chanello, that was amazing. I would love to talk a little bit offline. So I've been the Executive Director of Youth on Record for over 10 years, which is an organization that is focused on the liberation of young people and communities. And I'm also the co-founder of All in Denver, a 501c4 here in Denver that specifically works towards more equitable public policy and getting people more engaged politically. And then I'm currently sitting on the Denver's Cultural Affairs Commission, and my role there is to be, hopefully a little bit of a squeaky wheel and like a troublemaker in terms of equitably distributing public art dollars to communities who have not had access to those. So I think if you would ask me 5 years ago about empowerment, my definition would have been a little bit different. It probably would have been a little bit more academic. I'd be talking about equity. Our Youth on Record's tagline is empowerment through creative education. We focus on a liberatory and engaged pedagogy. And so when I think about empowerment now, it's shifted for me into a very sort of individual journey. I think there's nothing less empowering than not being able to be the fullest expression of yourself and to not be able to live into your true nature. And so empowerment to me is a radical acceptance of your true nature and then radically accepting the true nature of those around you without any expectations that they change, that they alter, that they be more who you want them and need them to be. And that means in some of the community work we're doing, but that really also means in your relationships. And so that is the work that we have really doubled down on at Youth on Record, is how do we create the spaces for young people and our team to get to know who they really are. From a very early age, we are put into systems that don't allow us to be sort of a radical expression of our true nature. And those are, in our society, in our homes, in our schools, in our places of worship, really in our family bubbles and family norms about what we're supposed to be doing. So this is across the board. And then you put, marginalized and minoritized communities in particular are being asked to fit into a particular norm that who created that. And so for me, this has become a very personal journey. And that's where I've doubled down as, the leader of Youth on Record. My work is truly to create the space and the opportunity for our team to be the fullest expression of who they are at the workplace. And by creating that space, they can be the fullest expression of who they are when they're working with young people and create that kind of dynamic within our classrooms and our programming. So that's become really personal, very individual, and less sort of systemic approach that I had maybe was taking about 5 years ago. And thanks so much for having me.
Love it. Thank you so much for being here, Jamie. And next up is Dr. Anne Prince, who is with the Department of Psychology at the University of Denver, and she's also the director for the Center for Community Engagement. And she is also the recipient of the university's 2020 Distinguished University Professor. So congratulations on that, Anne. Anne, delighted to have you on the call tonight and delighted to have your voice in this important conversation. So tell us more about your background and what does empowerment and what does this topic mean to you right now?
Thank you so much for that generous introduction and for this opportunity tonight for this incredible conversation. I, as Brian said, direct the Center for Community Engagement, or CECL as we call it, at DU. And my path to CECL was through my own research. I focus on research into gender violence, violence against women and children, and really over the years have come to understand that you can't answer important public questions without partnership. That universities don't know necessarily the right questions or best questions to ask, and certainly don't know the answers in isolation. And so as my own research became more community engaged and partnership guided and focused and centered, being able to play a role at the university was really exciting in promoting that kind of community university partnership. And so I'm just so excited by what has come up already about empowerment, the comments about activating power and the radical expression of our true nature. The things that I think about with empowerment, I think tie in some ways, in many ways, including I've been thinking about how the term empowerment gets co-opted there's the problems that people raised of it. It invokes hierarchical systems and the idea of who we give access to, who gets access to power, and that's problematic. And then there's this co-opting that is not what Jamie's talking about radical acceptance, that I think has the ability to help us engage with one another. But there's this sort of personal wellness or more capitalistic use of empowerment. That's like if you buy the right products and you're an empowered person, that's about a personal journey that's not to that authenticity that Jamie's speaking about. And so when I think about empowerment and how we work with students at DU and engaging with community partners, what really I think is important to pull out is this notion of how do we begin to build power with and avoid systems and dismantle systems that are focused on power over, which is what empowerment can sometimes represent. So thank you for this chance to be part of the conversation today, and already so many inspiring things.
Thank you, and delighted to have your voice here tonight. So last up before we dive into our questions is Eric Kornacki, President CEO of Thrive Partners LLC. Eric, thanks so much for being here. It's a joy to see you here, and tell us more about kind of your reactions and reflections on this topic of empowerment.
Great conversation, and I'd have to say that, like Jamie, my answer today is probably different, hopefully a little more nuanced and grounded in reality than it would have been 5 years ago, even 10 years ago, 15 years ago when I was at the University of Denver. And I, as a student, I'm trying to think back of what it was like as a student, grappling with a lot of these concepts in an academic sense. Fortunately, through Cecil, thanks Anne for continuing that great work there, I was able to wrestle with a lot of those questions about how to take action, how to create policy change, how to address issues of inequity, resilience, poverty, et cetera, right here in our own city, rather than just kind of through textbooks and in the classroom. And so I think, getting involved in programs like Cecil that is providing real world experience where you can really grapple with these things is so invaluable. And I just remember when I graduated from DU in 2007, it was right 6 months later, there was a Great Recession hit, right? So we started to see the collapse of our housing sector and our financial sector and our banking sector. And it was right around the same time where I was launching a nonprofit that was initially, how do we trying to solve the problems of poverty, inequity, and structural racism, et cetera, on a sort of international scale, right? And quickly needed to kind of rein that in and say, now's not the time to do international work. How do we pivot and realize that so much of the problem begins right here at home and needs to be solved at home? And so I got involved in doing a lot of community development work right here in Denver. And as a white male that came from a lot of privilege and came from, one of a great institution such as DU and came with that perspective, had to really wrestle with this word. And I remember grappling with the word empowerment deeply when we were writing our mission statement, and should we include it, should we not, right? I mean, this is very much the ethos and the spirit of what we're talking about. But we ultimately decided that no, empowerment, as Anne pointed out and others have said, that it is based on this hierarchy, and we don't want to perpetuate that. And so, Chinello, I think you said, it's really about activating the power that is already there. And so for the past 15 years, I've really been wrestling with how do we address structural racism and poverty within our own backyard here in Denver, and working on the ground in communities that have legacies of redlining, legacies of that you still see today, right? Some of the same neighborhoods that are now grappling with gentrification and development pressures, also scrambling to find resources during COVID. Like, how do we build a base of power as a community, or how do we activate the resources that we already have in order to solve these problems, or to take action, or to change the system the way that it's being perpetrated, right? And so I think that it was so funny, Janella, when you said, Paulo Freire, every single head was nodding, like, yes, like, I mean, that was such like, that is the pedagogy, right? I mean, it is such a foundational approach. And I read that later after beginning to do community development work and realizing that so many of those things are rooted, popular education, and a lot of this is rooted in the idea that the power already exists, right? And if we are not cognizant of it, if we don't do our own inner work, if we don't come into a situation and really check our own privilege and I think ask ourselves the tough questions like, how can I best contribute? How can I best activate? How can I best organize in a way that is going to dismantle these systems rather than perpetuate them? That's kind of like, right. That's the meat of it. That's the pithy stuff that we're all trying to get into.
Love it. Thank you, Eric. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight. And I think we've set up for a really phenomenal conversation tonight. So we are here talking about the future of Denver. And we are in our final, the sixth in our 6-part series, talking about what does action look like in 2020? And how do we begin to build a new generation of Denverites who take action to build up and to address some of the changes and the challenges that face our great city. And so with that, I want to invite our audience to submit your questions, and we'll do our best to work those in as we go. But Eric Kornecki, I want to stick with you, and so much of your story that really I think inspires me and inspires so many other people is that, you go to Nicaragua for study abroad and you have this groundbreaking experience where you visit a sweatshop, and for anyone that hasn't seen your TED Talk, highly recommend checking that out. But you talk about this idea and this inspiration that, you brought that back to Denver, and you brought that back to how you thought about your career, and you used that really to, I think, inform so much of how you began to tackle the work and to address some of these inequities. And in your talk, you have this idea of what does a place-based economy look like. We're talking about empowerment, but we're also talking, about how do we address some of the hierarchies, that prevent that real sense of empowerment. And so you built this model with Revision, and maybe help just sort of inform the group about what that organization is and what you did for Revision over all those years, and how you really helped to create this place-based economic model that really created power from within the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so picking up in Nicaragua, again, a program that I was able to have the privilege of attending through the University of Denver and getting to go down on and study abroad and really experience firsthand what it's like to live in another country and to see so many of the global inequities that we're all complicit in, and really that were at least hidden from me. And I'll only speak for myself, but that was my moment where I woke up and I saw how I was connected to it all, and really wrestled with that for quite a while after, in some ways still am. So starting an organization to try to begin changing that, it felt like change was never going to happen from the top. It feels so hopeless, right? And I don't want to sound cynical, but I didn't see a path forward to create the type of change that I wanted to see in the world through the traditional political structure. And so I felt that the way we could take action, the way that we could affect change the most effectively, and I would say like authentically, is on a local level. And for me, that was really looking at, okay, well, and I'll use the example that really led me to a neighborhood in Southwest Denver called Westwood. I was invited by our councilman and several residents that were grappling with trying to figure out how to increase access to healthy food in a community that didn't have any healthy food choices. And we talked a lot about solutions in the first meeting, and a lot of them were within the conversation of what policy changes, what political changes can we make to bring a grocery store here or to change this. And I looked around the table and I said, you have all the assets you already need. You have people that know how to grow food, that are passionate about growing food, that you look in the community, there's plenty of space to grow food. Like, what would that look like? Let's look at a solution on a local level that doesn't require, the political machinations and all the levers and all of that wrangling. It's like, let's take action tomorrow. Let's get some seeds, let's till some ground, let's plant, and let's bring a community together. And so for me, building a place-based economy is really the solution that I felt, again, could answer so many of the things that I think have already been sort of like peppered throughout this conversation. And if you have a community where people don't know each other, or they don't see their own power, they don't see themselves reflected in the community, they don't know how to get involved and be a part of contributing to a better, future for themselves, for their children, for their neighbors, we just needed to provide the platform or the pathways. And so I think that when we look at how to bring action down to that local level, and then within that, not be so singularly focused. Like revision was never solely about food or building food systems, right? It was about building place-based solutions that led to resiliency, that led to improved health, that led to really kind of fall in this new economy. And from there, we started tackling issues that I never would have dreamed of, right? Because that's what was important to residents. So when we're having a meeting about a grocery store and people say, yeah, that's great, but I don't even feel safe crossing the street, right? So now we got to address the street. We got to get street lamps in. We got to get sidewalks in. We got to talk about, signal crossings, or our kids, yeah, grocery store is fine, but we don't have any healthy place to go play or a safe place to play. So now we're talking about parks, and now we're talking about infrastructure. Now we're talking about these other resources. I think when you look at a specific place, you see how all these systems interact together, and that way we can affect change more as rapidly and effectively.
And Jamie Duffy, I want to pull you in because I think this thread that Eric's talking about how do we inspire action at a very local level. You've been with Youth on Record now for over 10 years, and you've empowered over 1,400 teens, in the Denver metro area, really to, with so much of the work that you do. And so, I think a common complaint about community organizations is that they're either too focused on a small subset of individuals. So the proverbial kind of starfish challenge, it matters to this particular starfish, so that's why I'm not going to throw it back in the sea. And then on the flip side of that is they're too focused on macro, and that there's not enough connectivity, or there's not enough connective tissue, I think, back to the neighborhoods and the communities that really they're trying to address. So how have you, over the course of the 10 years, really found that sweet spot with Youth on Record?
Yeah, I think when you're attempting to meet immediate needs in addition to solve for systemic inequity, and that is a challenge. And I think that the way that where we are in our iteration now of working through that is to have constant conversations and communication within our team about both. Right. And so as a team, we are discussing systemic issues. We are discussing an immediate need of this kid right now in COVID, but we have also gotten to a place where we discuss that with the community at large, right? We don't shy away from the fact that we are an anti-racist organization. We don't shy away from telling donors that the number one cause of harm to our young people is white supremacy. And so I think sometimes naming that, but then being in a way where we can call people in instead of calling them out, it has been a really helpful approach for us. And the truth is, it is not beyond me that I am a white woman who is an executive director of a primarily BIPOC serving organization that has a primarily BIPOC team. And these are conversations we have all the time. And I am probably a little bit more on the side of maybe it's time for me to go than my team is, in part because our leadership structure has really evolved to where there's so many decision makers in the organization. And in a lot of ways, I see myself in a support role to open up doors, provide access to funding, connections, relationships. So for us, if you're going to do I would argue that there is no work that's worth it that's not systemic. And we just have to get to the point where we're saying, yeah, that's the real thing, right? And I also want to bring something up because there's folks I would consider young people. If you're under 25, I consider you a young person. We've got like young emerging leaders who are watching tonight and who are on this call with us. And I think it's a really hard place to be in the world for anybody who watches that show called The Good Place. My favorite part of that show was when they realized that for like 500 years, nobody got in. It's impossible. It's impossible to live a life where you have done no harm, right? You can spend your whole life doing community work. And I'm seeing in this generation who has a heart unlike anything I have ever seen. It's also, they're more aware of the systemic issues, and they are more aware of the David versus Goliath situation that we're in. And so if the focus is on the big systems, which it has to be, it can also de-incentivize action, because it's like, how the hell do I beat that? So I think the balance has to be that system is there. These are the conditions it's causing, and these are the conditions that it's caused in me. And, you know, to Anne's point, I do think there's that balance between kind of a sort of like self-care as a replacement for self-knowledge. Those aren't the same thing, right? So again, it's going to go back to, I've got the system, I'm seeing what it's doing here, and now I have to do some examination of what it's doing here. Then when you get to that place, then you start going back up the ladder, right? But you don't want to stay here. You don't want to stay just in this area, and you don't want to just stay in the system. If you stay just in the system, you're defeated, right? And if you just stay here, you're a narcissist. And so you've got to be in that balance of knowing that there's multiple ways you have to go about it in your life. And you can't, like, you will walk away and we will all die, and we will all, who knows, examine our life. And we will hopefully have done our very best. And so I just want to put that out there, because this world is tough and complicated, and these systems are a nightmare. And I don't want that to get in anybody's way of following your own heart and your own journey, and where your heart is bleeding. Like, there's always work to be done as a human being. Even if we can't, in my lifetime, eradicate white supremacy, though we're going to try and give it our all. So, you know, that's the approach that we take at our workplace as well.
Well, I'm gonna come back to something Chanello said, and an author that he mentioned with Paulo Freire. You know, that so much of, you know, beginning to address, you know, things like, you know, oppression, for example, begins with just naming it. You know, and giving it a name, and the power that resides in that. And so taking some of these first steps, you know, is so critical, you know, and I think oftentimes we overlook things like fatigue and mental health, you know, within the community of people that are, you know, really on the front lines of taking care of our communities. And that's a whole separate conversation. But Jamie Duffy, I'd be remiss if I didn't stick with you for one more question. You know, you talk about this idea of kind of the systems, you know, and I think about your work with All in Denver, you know, focused on really addressing a lot of the local public policy, which is sort of another thread of this conversation. But, you know, you've really inspired me, and I know a lot of other people, with your thoughts around this idea of what does it mean for Denver to be a world-class city, you know, in 2020. And, you know, and oftentimes, you know, we love to tout our economy and all these great sort of lifestyle metrics, you know, and say, look at us, you know, we're this great vanguard city. And yet we continue to see struggles with homelessness, with food insecurity, you know, with high school graduation rates. So, you know, what does it mean, you know, in your view, for Denver to truly be, I guess, a world-class city?
Yeah, I think the idea behind a world-class city is, again, rooted in what a privileged view of world-class is. And, you know, I think when you and I talked a couple of years ago, I was like, I can't do this anymore with the, like, Denver, the world-class city. Denver's a world-class place to live. I'm like, for who, right? It's like, watch yourselves. That is borderline make America great again. It's just coming from liberal mouths. So, like, watch it, because it's not world-class for the people who are dying right now. It's not world-class for the people who are about to get swept from the only place they can rest their bodies in 2 days. That is not world-class. I don't care how beautiful the Denver Center for Performing Arts is. I don't care how great the Denver Art Museum is. I don't care how many copper roofs the University of Denver has. It is not world-class if we have lost our humanity, and it is not world-class if maybe we didn't have it to begin with. And so until we can right the wrongs, until we can start to say that, start to feel that deep connection with each other and recognize that we are a part of something together, I don't even see how we can be world-class. And I have rejected the idea of even wanting to be. I want to be the most humane city the world has ever seen. Like, if the goal is something else, that's what I want to see. That's the kind of leadership I want to see. And I want to see more of that in myself, and I want to see more of that in all of us. And so I think we have to reject that. I think we have to reject a list that this is the best place to live. Like, don't put one more of those lists on my Facebook feed. I can't read it. I can't see it. How's it the best place to live when a single family home costs over $500,000, $625,000, according to 5280 magazine? When people can't, when there's no land ownership, when there's no rightful recognition of whose land this is. That's not world class. You know, so I think we need a different goal, you know, the most humane city that's ever existed, and we're all in it together. Let's go for that. So, you know, yeah.
Thank you. I love that. That I think is so much to unravel, you know, and sort of like, you know, cogitate on there, you know. I want to pull in Chanella Tyler, because I think you add such an important dimension to this conversation. You know, you're the co-executive director for the Kaleidoscope Project, which is focused on assisting organizations through training and through dispatching people of color who represent underserved populations. And you really, what I love so much about your model is that you empower them to go back into their communities and to do this advocacy work on a very local level. So tell us more about some of the programs that you offer and kind of the model that you stumbled on there, and some of the success, I guess, you're seeing with, you know, with this approach.
Yeah. So the Kaleidoscope Project, the mission of the organization is to activate collective power within BIPOC communities through grassroots organizing, civic engagement, and cultural fortitude. And so our approach is all about, one, acknowledging those three pillars: grassroots organizing, understanding the groundwater approach that, you know, racism looks the same across systems. And so in understanding that, we know that there's a certain level of awareness that we need to have around the communities that we're working with in our response. And so before we move to response, we need to acknowledge, one, the struggles that exist within the communities, how the likelihoods are however many times higher for them to experience injustice within those communities, and coordinate in ways to make our programming as accommodating as possible, and as accessible as possible, and do it in a way that activates power and gives integrity and humanity to those entities. And so most recently in this past year, we've been able to do work dealing with food sovereignty with Tri-County, and that initiative basically started as a program in which Tri-County wanted to do a storytelling project, and they trusted us in a partnership to be able to say, hey, we want to take this storytelling project, and at the end of the storytelling project, we don't just want to leave people with a feeling, but we want to leave people with an initiative or a next step or something that was self-sustaining, that would give back food sovereignty for a long term, or for, you know, enough for us to never have to like double back to doing that project. And so we coupled grassroots organizing with what we consider to be the cultural fortitude aspect, the arts, which understands that BIPOC communities, marginalized people throughout the years have fortified themselves within their cultures, whether it's through music, whether it's through dance, whether it's through art, whether it's through the culinary arts or agriculture, so many different things. And so we provide the resources and the support, right, to amplify the message that they're trying to live through grassroots organizing within the arts. So we're making songs about food justice. We're making videos, videography, photography, but also reaching out and teaching these organizers who are working with, who are from those communities, what's a one-on-one? How do you identify power within the community and power map? What does it look like to host a town hall and bring communities together? What policies are impacting the communities what's keeping grocery stores that are healthy from coming into marginalized communities? What's the formula? Does it have to do with matriculation within the household? Does it have to do with the household's income? Identifying these different things and raising awareness and equipping community members with the necessary tools to respond and to self-sustain on the long term. So at the end of the storytelling project, not only did the organizers record songs and do videos and visit community members and document the food efforts that were happening within Colorado, but they were also able to, in addition to doing those things, they raised $65,000 at the end of the project, dedicated towards food justice, furthering the food justice project and doing general operations for the Kaleidoscope project upcoming year. But then also, they were able to secure 13 raised beds from their organizing with community members at Shore Community AME Church, which then they will use to harvest next season and continue their food justice efforts within those BIPOC communities, those marginalized communities who are in need of food or who have food insecurities. And so this is all happening through like partnerships with the community and just going and amplifying and tapping on community members who are already doing these things, connecting the dots and finding ways to get through the red tape and bring those members to the table and let them be the voice for themselves.
And Chanel, just a follow-up question for you, sticking with you in terms of your work, and so much of I think what you're doing with Kaleidoscope Project is interfacing with with youth, and so help us understand I think how the next generation is interfacing with community organizations and how they're driving some of the social change, and what are the things that individuals like myself and others on the call need to be mindful of when we think about engaging the next generation.
Yeah, I think it's just all about like today understanding the power that exists within within my generation and generations that are younger than me, and just kind of like how intelligent they are because of how accessible information is right now, the things that they're learning from just current events and the level of awareness around conversations with race, economics, or just society in general are way more kitchen table, I think, than they had been for a while. So when I think about people who are my age or who are younger, a lot of times we're having conversations with our parents about these things, or we're the ones coming to the dinner table and saying, hey, let's talk about equity and inclusion and diversity tonight. And let's figure out a way forward for our family. Or, hey, I know you traditionally have believed this, or I know that this has been, your father and your father's idea of how the world is, but let's really have a conversation about the realities that exist. And that just goes back to level of awareness that needs to be raised in all communities, not just marginalized ones, around the reality of like what's happening today. And that's why I'm glad that I'm on this conversation with everybody who's on this call, just hearing the transparency in Eric's sentiments and him talking about wanting to respond the day after, or hearing the transparency in Jamie's comments and where she's talking about like her visibility in regards to her organization. It says that there's a level of awareness and that oppressed people don't have to think that, people don't see these realities that are happening every day. And so it's a dark place that you could get lost in, thinking that, you're isolated, that you're alone. And so it's good to know and see that there's a level of awareness being raised, because that's what moves people to response and not acting on a daily basis as if these things don't exist, or that certain individuals aren't however many times likely to experience injustice and moving towards action.
Well, and I think normalizing some of those conversations, and socializing people around that these can be dinner table conversations, and they should be.
Yeah.
We don't have a very good history of that, I think, in our country, and when we don't sort of embrace those tensions and the discomfort with those conversations, I think we miss out on so much connection and so much learning. So I love the work you're doing, and I love that framework that you're providing us with of, bringing it down to the kitchen table, that unit of measurement that's so hyper local, and really just being to socialize people around what these conversations mean and why they're important. So, so thank you. Mm-hmm. Dr. Anda Prince, I want to bring you in. This is, as you listen to leaders like Chinelo and Eric and Jamie, how does their work start to inform, I think, some of how you think about, the role that the university can play and what role partnerships start to play, I think, and really addressing some of these social changes.
Well, I think all of these comments make clear why the only way forward is through partnership, that bringing together the strength and the perspectives and the academic expertise, the lived experience, the day-to-day expertise, like all of these things are necessary. And if we are missing any of these voices at the table, we've done ourselves a disservice in terms of really understanding issues and driving solutions forward. And I think, universities have a long, complicated history of their roles in communities. And where we have caused harm is frequently because we decide we know what the questions are, what the answers are. And that's been really problematic. And universities have to grapple with that history and have to figure out how to move forward in a way that is more just and equitable. And I think these voices tonight speak to why partnership is an essential answer to the way forward. And that's certainly the perspective that Cecil has taken in terms of trying to activate university community partnerships in the service of public good, and recognizing that universities can play a role, but ours is just a role in this larger ecosystem of our community. So it's just very exciting and inspiring to imagine ways of bringing the forms of power that we each have access to and the ability to activate together. And the idea of helping to a new generation of students at DU to help them understand traditions of organizing and the contemporary history that's being written right now by folks like Chinelo and Jamie, and to invite them into that process is just really inspiring and exciting.
Thank you. And we are, it's hard to believe, but we're actually rounding the corner to our last 15 minutes here. And so we have this tradition in our chats where we like to go around the room and kind of have folks share some parting nuggets. And as we wrap up this particular chat and this conversation, we've been doing these now for about the last 10 weeks. And what I've learned is that whenever you talk to anyone about the future of Denver, what you're really having is a conversation about equity. And so with that in mind, since this is our closing segment and we've got just a few minutes left, I want to return to a question that we asked our very first panel. And I think it's an important one, I think, for this moment in time and for this conversation. And that's what voices need to be amplified and who needs to be at the table to ensure that Denver becomes a world-class city. So with that, Andy Prince, I want to stay with you and get your closing thoughts on that idea.
Thanks, Brian. I think in terms of voices at the table, a key question is whether we still want to have a table. So I think the last many weeks and months and years have revealed just how active of a process minoritization and marginalization is. And so I think what I'm really inspired to think about and learn from folks I'm working with is what are new ways, not to simply amplify voices or put another seat at the table, but really redefine how we work together and our motivations for it and our approach to it. I think back to what Chinelo said at the start about we don't do this work because it feels good. And the idea of we really talk a lot at Cecil about the lens of this work in the service of the public good, that it's not charity, that we're not inviting people to the table because that feels good. It's a feel good thing to do. This is an intentional approach to making the world a more just and equitable place. So I guess I'm avoiding your question in a way by saying, do we even want a table? And instead, how do we encourage conversations where we're really getting at root causes of problems, that we're persistently going back to what are the racist policies or gendered policies or other kinds of things that are keeping the structures, current structures of power in place, and then how do we, again, the phrase has been used a lot tonight, but how do we not so much amplify voices, but activate power? And I love Eric's example of let's just do it now. Universities are well known for spending a lot of time thinking great thoughts about things. And one of the most inspiring things lately has been seeing the university really learn how to agitate for change and be more nimble in some of the ways that we're approaching collaboration, so that groups of people are coming together and activating their power and taking action. There's been a group, for example, working with the Colorado Safe Parking Initiative, where they've made tremendous progress in recent months on key initiatives that arose up out of the community. So those are the things that I find myself excited about, and especially thinking about tonight among this incredible panel. Thanks.
Love that. Thank you. And I love the metaphor. I think even behind just examining the table itself, and what does that mean as an instrument? Kudos for coming up with an answer that I never would have thought of in a million years. So you get bonus points for creativity. Chanella Tyler, moving on to you. So when you think about this idea, what voices need to be at the table, and how do we get them there?
Yeah, I really like what Ann just said about, do we even want a table? But ours is, in regards to amplifying voices, I'll refer back to Paulo Freire in my beginning statements, and going back to kind of just breaking that culture of silence. Not so much looking at what voices to amplify, because if we're quiet enough and if we listen well enough, then, everything's kind of clear, and it's very apparent, like what needs to be done within our society, within our communities, on local levels, on national levels, federally, within the government, within organizing. And so I think for me, it's about breaking that culture of silence. And breaking that culture of silence looks like having conversations, tough conversations, but then also being intentional so that we don't miss moments. And so I listened to somebody give a talk, and they talked about how we missed a moment in the 90s when we started having conversations about inclusion and diversity. And then we didn't really talk that much about equity, like what it really meant beyond having a Black person being a token at a company, or having this positive mind frame about community work and giving back and being charitable. And so for me right now, it's all about not missing a moment, instead of thinking about like amplifying voices, but just really thinking about everything that's kind of happened, even in just this past year, and how that's a microcosm of what we've built as a nation over the past 400 years, and how we can move forward, and how we can recognize that, that this is a reality, and that we might need to respond as soon as tomorrow or yesterday.
Yeah. Thank you. Jamie Duffy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just want to say I love what both of you just said, so I'm not going to repeat any of that. And I'm just going to assume there's not a table right now. So for me, the sort of parting thoughts after I already went on my rant about world-class city, I would say, we're in a moment right now where we've been possibly given a chance for some introspection, and not to confuse that with kind of a self-centeredness. But I have a personal belief system that if everybody is doing your work, and I mean your work, that like radical, this is who I am in my deepest essence, and therefore this is my work, you can't take what's not yours. You won't do it. You won't take a seat that doesn't belong to you. And you won't know the difference until you dig into that inner life. And you have to get to know yourself to recognize whether or not you're sitting in a seat at a table you don't even really want to be there. So that's sort of a conversation to folks who maybe have some privilege of either having a seat at the table, who had a parent who had a seat at the table, who once they leave the table, you get their seat, right? Like all of that stuff is like, do you even want that seat? Right? And so I think I can't say enough about digging into your inner life and doing some of that work. And so much of that work is healing work and trauma work. And I think the more as a community that we dig into a trauma-informed approach with ourselves, a healing-centered approach with our students and ourselves and our families and our communities, we will find that there is room for everyone. Like we are competing. We've set up a system of competition that I believe on a deep human level have outgrown. We just don't know how to get out of it. And I think one way to get out of it, and it's not the only way, and again, please don't stay there, because then that's when you're like borderline, a little bit of a, like that's when you can be a borderline narcissist, right? Where like it's all about me and all about my self-care, but you have to do work that's deep there to recognize whether or not you're taking something that doesn't belong to you. And so that's work that I hope to continue throughout my life. And then if you build that up in a community, you'll have people around you who say, hey man, that's not yours. That's not yours, right? Or you'll have people around you who say, that's yours, go get that thing. So those would be my parting words.
Eric Kornacki, you get the final word.
Oh, wow. Tough to add to that right now, just reflecting on all the truth bombs that have been dropped. I think, I want to say that who belongs to the table, it's not people like me anymore, and I think that really speaking to all the white people sitting in positions of power at those proverbial tables, like, and to your point, JB, like, we shouldn't be there, right? And we shouldn't be taking the place of somebody else that needs to be there, that should be there. And a couple of stats that are kind of like been lingering in my head the past couple of days. I think Kresge just released a report that said like 95% of all the money in philanthropy goes to white-led organizations. 95%, right? And so for those organizations working in BIPOC communities, like that are headed by white people, and Jamie, like I had this conversation a year and a half ago with my team. They didn't want me to leave, but I said, I need to leave. Like, this is not the organization. We're not fulfilling our mission if I stay, right? And I think that those are the types of conversations we need to have and have really deeply and authentically. Another one, and on a local level, I think Denver just announced that what's like a new participatory budgeting process. Jamie, you probably know more than I do on this, that asking, community and citizens to allocate $150 million. Is that right? It comes out to less than like 1% of the city's overall budget, right? So how do we increase that? How do we increase it so that more citizens and more residents of the city are involved in participatory budgeting and making those decisions and having those conversations? And so I'm really just like grappling with like, how do we start dismantling these structures of money and power? And that's really, I think, where we need to center a lot of these conversations. And then just recognize that, particularly when we talk about, kind of wrapping up empowerment, this conversation on empowerment and taking action, that so much of the work is being done and being shouldered by BIPOC communities, right? And it's not given credit. And I think about all of the, we want to give kudos for corporate volunteer days and feel good, the several times a year that maybe we volunteer when we don't have to, right? When it's Andrea just put a comment up, examine your seat, right? When communities that are having to do the work for self-preservation, for mutual aid, for taking care of one another, and it's not getting credit as civic engagement, or it's not being viewed as a volunteerism, right? We don't acknowledge it the same way that we do, like if I show up and put on the hat and do the photo op and volunteer for a day. And so I just want to also kind of closing thought on that too.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you so much, everyone on our panel tonight. I think what I love most about it is the word that pops in my mind right now is this idea of evolution. and dismantling. I even think some of the ways in which we are framing this conversation. Over the course of an hour, we've done away with the word empowerment. We've done away with the metaphor of the table, and I think it speaks to, I think, the need for change. It speaks also to the leaders in our community that are not only helping to lead the charge, but helping to reimagine. What does this space look like? So with that, Eric Kornacki, Chanella Tyler, Jamie Duffy, Dr. Anna Prince, thank you all so much for being here tonight. It is a joy to have you all on this conversation, and it's been a joy to run this series with you, Gertie, and with the team at Fireside. And it's hard to believe that we've reached the end now of this 6-part series and this conversation with Denver. And I just want to share my appreciation before I hand the table over to Gertie. But thank you all so much for this important conversation and this important time.
Yeah, I want to just echo all of Brian's sentiments there. This might have been my favorite panel, not going to lie. There were a few times where I really just got in my head and I was taking notes and I was like, wow, I need to do some thinking after all of this. So I just want to thank you guys all for being such amazing panelists and providing us all with your insights and contributions. That was really important. So as we wrap up this 6-part series with the University of Denver, I feel really incredibly proud and hopeful for the future of the city as a whole. We've spoken with 30 panelists over the last 3 months, and we've covered everything from equitable development to hospitality to civic engagement. I feel really confident with our industry leaders at the wheel that Denver is headed for a successful 2021 and beyond. Hopefully we can become more humane instead of a world-class city, like Jamie said. The resilience we've seen from all of our panelists over the last 6 chats has been really inspiring. And so I hope everyone that watched at home felt that as well. I'm really grateful as well to the University of Denver, my alma mater, for diving into these conversations with us and being a great partner throughout the series. It's really refreshing to work with an institution that values inclusivity and isn't afraid to ask the hard questions. So that's really huge. Thank you guys for being willing to do that with us. And thank you to everyone who's been tuning into these chats. We are so appreciative of all of you, and we're looking forward to new content in 2021. Lastly, I'd like to thank our great facilitator, Brian Elizardi, our media partner, Do 303, and our beverage partner, Mythology Distillery. Special shout out to Brews Beers and Atimo Wine, who were 2 of our beverage partners earlier on in the series. That's all from me, folks. I hope you guys all have a wonderful evening. And for those celebrating Hanukkah tonight, happy holidays. This has been Fireside at 5. Have a great rest of 2020, and we'll see you in the new year. Thanks all.